Revenge is not a passion in the heart of a 14-year-old girl. It is a business transaction. It is a ledger to be balanced, a debt to be collected, a final account to be settled. And for Mattie Ross of Dardanelle, Arkansas, the business of revenge began on a cold morning in Fort Smith, when she arrived alone on the ferry, her father's body packed in a pine box, and a steel trap of a mind ready to close on his killer. She was not a child, though the world insisted on seeing her as one. She was the acting head of her family, an executor of an estate, and a client looking to hire a gun. She stepped on to the muddy, chaotic street of Fort Smith, a town brimming with marshals, outlaws, and whiskey, and she did not falter. Her face, framed by dark braids, was sharp, intelligent, and held a look of profound, unwavering seriousness. She had a list. First, see to her father, Frank Ross. Second, settle his accounts. Third, hire the man who would hunt his murderer. Her first stop was the undertaker. Her father, a good and honest man, had been murdered 2 days prior by his own hired hand, Tom Cheney. Frank Ross had gone to Fort Smith to buy a string of ponies for his ranch. He had taken Cheney with him, an act of kindness toward a man with few prospects. That kindness was repaid with 2 bullets in the chest. The undertaker led her into a cold back room. There, on a wooden slab, lay her father, his features peaceful in death, save for the dark, dried blood on his shirt. Mattie looked at him, her posture rigid. There were no tears. Tears were a luxury, a weakness she could not afford. She was not here to grieve. She was here to identify the body and confirm the debt. "Who was this Cheney?" the undertaker asked, his voice softened by professional pity, a tone Mattie already despised. "He was a hired man," Mattie stated, her voice as flat and hard as iron. "He has a black mark on his cheek, a powder burn. He is a large man with dull eyes." She already knew his description by heart. She knew that after shooting her father, Cheney had stolen his horse, his 2 gold pieces, and his .45 caliber pistol. And most importantly, she knew where he had gone. He had fled south into the Indian Territory, a place where the local police had no jurisdiction, a place where only a man with a federal badge could ride. Her second stop was the stable, run by a man named Colonel Stonehill. Her father, before his death, had bought a string of ponies from the man, but had also left behind his own horses and wagon. Mattie arrived to find Stonehill a man who, like all the others, saw a child and assumed he was dealing with a fool. He offered her a pittance for her father's recovered property, his voice a smooth, condescending baritone. "I will not be selling the ponies my father bought," Mattie said, her hands clasped firmly in front of her. "As my father was murdered before he could take possession, I consider the sale void. I am here to collect the $325 he paid you." Colonel Stonehill laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Little sister, the ponies are yours. A deal is a deal." "The deal is void," Mattie repeated, her eyes never leaving his. "My father's lawyer, Mr. Daggett, will find you in breach of contract. Furthermore, you sold my father ponies that were ridden out and broken down. You will take them back." For 20 minutes they haggled. Stonehill, a veteran horse trader, found himself pinned by the girl's relentless, logical assault. She knew the law, she knew horses, and she had no capacity for being intimidated. She argued about saddles, about storage fees, about the exact market value of a gray horse versus a bay. She wore him down, her voice never rising, her gaze never faltering. Finally, exasperated and for the first time impressed, Stonehill threw up his hands. "I will buy the ponies back, but at a loss. I will not be rooked by a child." "You will pay me $300 and I will keep the wagon and team. or I will see you in court, and my lawyer, Mr. Daggett, will take you for every cent you have. I have no time to waste on this matter." She walked out of that stable with $325 in her pocket. She had not only settled her father's account, she had turned a profit. She had proven her grit. Now she had the capital to fund her true mission. Her third stop was the U.S. Marshal's office. She needed a man who could ride into the territory and drag Tom Cheney back to Fort Smith to hang. Not just any marshal. She had been warned that Cheney had likely fallen in with a more dangerous gang, led by the notorious outlaw Lucky Ned Pepper. This was not a job for a cautious man or a part-time officer. This was a job for the meanest, most relentless man she could find. She asked the local sheriff, "Who is the best of your marshals?" The sheriff thought for a moment. "Well, there's Marshal Potter, a good man, very thorough." "I do not need thorough," Mattie said. "I need a man with true grit. I am told Tom Cheney is in Ned Pepper's gang. Who is the toughest, most ruthless marshal you have?" The sheriff sighed, a look of resignation on his face. "Well, if you're talking about ruthless, there's one, but I cannot recommend him. He's a one-eyed, drunken fat man, a pitiless man, double tough, and he has a reputation for shooting first and asking questions later, if he asks them at all." "What is his name?" Mattie asked. "His name is Rooster Cogburn, but most folks just call him Rooster." Rooster Cogburn. The name had the right sound. It was hard, unpolished. She learned that he lived in the back of a Chinese grocery store, that he spent most of his time drinking, and that he had more bodies on his record than any other marshal in the territory. He was a brute, a drunk, and a killer. He was, she decided, the perfect man for the job. She made her way to the address, her money tucked safely in her coat. She walked through the front of the store, past barrels of dried fish and strange spices, and pushed open the door to the back room. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. And there, in the dim, messy room, hunched over a cot, was the man himself. He was large, paunchy, and wore a black eye patch. He looked up at her, his one good eye blurry with drink and irritation. "What do you want?" he growled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Mattie stood tall, her 14-year-old frame as rigid as a soldier's. She looked at the drunken, one-eyed wreck of a man, and she did not see a failure. She saw the tool she needed. "My name is Mattie Ross. I am here to hire you to kill Tom Cheney."
Rooster Cogburn's back room smelled of old whiskey, gun oil, and unwashed clothes. It was the lair of a man who had long ago given up on appearances, or indeed on much of anything, save for the pursuit of outlaws and the consumption of alcohol. Mattie Ross stood before him, a beacon of rigid decorum in a sea of squalor, unfazed by his gruff demeanor or his obvious inebriation. "Kill Tom Cheney, you say?" Cogburn rumbled, his one good eye, though blurry, fixed on her with a mixture of suspicion and grudging curiosity. "And what makes you think I'd be interested in your business, little sister?" "My father was Frank Ross," Mattie stated, her voice clear. "Tom Cheney murdered him and stole his horse and his gold pieces. I have $300 to offer as a reward for his capture and return to Fort Smith for hanging." Cogburn let out a cynical snort. $300 ain't much, girl, for Cheney. He's probably hooked up with Ned Pepper's gang by now. That's big trouble, bigger than any $300. Mattie did not flinch. "I am prepared to pay for your services, Marshal. You are reputed to be a man of true grit." Cogburn actually laughed then, a harsh, rattling sound. "True grit, eh? That's what they say. Well, true grit don't come cheap, and I work for the federal government, not for rich little girls with a blood feud."
My father's murderer fled into the Indian Territory, where your jurisdiction begins. He is wanted for murder. You have a duty to hunt him. My $300 will simply sweeten the pot and ensure that you, Marshal Cogburn, are the one to bring him to justice." They argued for what seemed like an hour. Mattie, with her precise legal arguments and unyielding logic, slowly chipped away at Cogburn's gruff resistance. She spoke of the law, of her father's good name, of the moral imperative. Cogburn spoke of money, of danger, of the futility of chasing ghosts. But beneath his bluster, Mattie sensed a flicker of something else, a grudging respect for her tenacity, and perhaps a buried sense of duty that even years of whiskey couldn't drown entirely. Finally, Cogburn threw up his hands in exasperation. "All right, girl, all right. I'll take your $300. But I go alone, and you stay here. This ain't no place for a girl." "I will be coming with you," Mattie stated. "This is my money and my father. I will see him hang." "You're crazy. You think you're going to ride into the territory with me? You'll be nothing but a nuisance, a liability." "I am neither. I am a good rider, I can shoot, and I am determined. You will take me with you, or I will find another marshal who will." Cogburn stared at her, then slowly shook his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He'd never met anyone like her. He knew deep down he was beaten. "All right," he grumbled, "but don't come crying to me when you see a hangin'." Just as they were coming to a reluctant agreement, another figure strode into Cogburn's messy room. He was a tall, handsome man, impeccably dressed in a slightly flamboyant Texas Ranger uniform, complete with shiny spurs and a buckskin jacket. He carried himself with an air of immense self-importance. "Marshal Cogburn, I presume," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "My name is LaBoeuf, Texas Ranger. I am also hunting a man named Tom Cheney." Mattie and Cogburn both stared. "What for?" Mattie demanded. LaBoeuf gave Mattie a condescending look before addressing Cogburn. "Cheney shot a senator in Texas, Marshal. There's a $500 reward for his capture and return to Texas for hanging." Mattie's face went rigid. $500. More than her $300. She immediately realized the danger. If LaBoeuf caught Cheney first, he would take him to Texas, and her father's murder would go unpunished in Arkansas. "He murdered my father in Arkansas," Mattie insisted, stepping forward. "He must hang here." "My jurisdiction is Texas," LaBoeuf said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "The senator's murder is federal. Your father's murder is local." Cogburn, seeing the larger reward, suddenly became much more interested. $500, you say? Well, now, that's a mighty fine sum for a man like Cheney. Maybe you and I, Ranger, can make a deal." Mattie felt a surge of cold panic. She had hired Cogburn for her father's justice. Now LaBoeuf was about to steal it. "Marshal Cogburn," she said, her voice sharp, "I hired you first. You gave me your word." "A man's word is worth what the market will bear, little sister," Cogburn grumbled, eyeing LaBoeuf's uniform, "and $500 is bearing a lot more." Mattie, cornered but not defeated, resorted to her only weapon, her iron will and knowledge of the law. "If you take Tom Cheney to Texas, Marshal Cogburn, you will be obstructing justice in Arkansas. Furthermore, my father owned the horse Cheney stole. That horse is my property. You will be aiding and abetting a horse thief." LaBoeuf scoffed. "A little girl's horse? That's not a federal matter." "It is when a federal marshal takes it across state lines," Mattie declared. "My lawyer, Mr. Daggett, will be very interested in that. He will also be very interested in how you, Marshal Cogburn, allowed this ranger to violate your jurisdiction." Cogburn rubbed his one good eye, a headache brewing. He looked from Mattie's unyielding face to LaBoeuf's cocky smirk. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. or rather, between a stubborn girl and a greedy ranger. Finally, a grudging compromise was struck. They would all ride together. Cogburn would pursue Cheney into the territory. If they caught him, they would try to get him back to Arkansas first for her father's hanging, before he could be taken to Texas for the senator's murder. LaBoeuf would tag along, ensuring Cheney's capture. Mattie would provide her $300 to Cogburn, who would receive the larger Texas bounty if Cheney couldn't be brought back to Arkansas. It was a messy, precarious alliance. LaBoeuf looked at Mattie with thinly veiled contempt. "You're not coming with us, girl. That's settled." "It is not settled," Mattie retorted, her chin raised defiantly. "I hired Marshal Cogburn. I ride with Marshal Cogburn. You may ride with us if you choose, but I am not staying." Cogburn, surprisingly, sided with Mattie. He saw the sheer force of her will. "She's coming," he grumbled to LaBoeuf. "She's got grit. Besides, she paid me. That makes her my boss." So it was settled. A strange, unlikely trio would ride into the dangerous Indian territory: a one-eyed, drunken marshal, a vain Texas ranger, and a fiercely determined 14-year-old girl, all chasing the same murderer, but for very different reasons. The business of revenge had just become a very complicated affair.
The Indian Territory was not a place. It was a promise of lawlessness, a vast, ungoverned expanse of rolling prairie, dense thickets, and winding rivers that served as a perfect hiding place for the wicked. And for Mattie Ross, it was the final battlefield. But her first battle was not against Tom Cheney. It was against the very men she had hired to help her. They arrived at the ferry landing on the south bank of the Arkansas River. This was the line. On this side was Fort Smith, civilization and law. On the other was the territory. Rooster Cogburn, his face set in a look of grim finality, dismounted and handed his reins to the ferryman. "We'll be taking our business across," Rooster grumbled. "And the girl?" the ferryman asked, jerking a thumb toward Mattie, who was already preparing her small pony, Little Blackie. "The girl stays here," Rooster said, his voice flat. Mattie's head snapped up. "I am not staying here. I have paid you, Marshal. I am going." LaBoeuf, who had been preening on his horse, let out a condescending sigh. "Child, we have been over this. This is no place for you. It's rough, dangerous country. You will be a liability. You will go back to your hotel and wait for our return." Mattie looked at the two large, armed men, then at the wide, churning river. They truly intended to leave her behind, to steal her money and her mission. "I will not," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "If you refuse me passage on this ferry, I will find another way across. I will not be abandoned." Rooster and LaBoeuf ignored her. They led their horses onto the ferry, paid the man, and the barge began its slow pull across the water. They stood on the deck, two confident, armed men, looking back at the small, solitary figure of the 14-year-old girl on the riverbank. They had finally, they thought, gotten rid of their problem. Mattie Ross sat on Little Blackie and watched them go. She looked at the water, a cold, gray, and fast-moving current. She was a 100-pound girl on a small pony. They were two professional lawmen on a government-sanctioned ferry. She looked at them, their backs turned to her, and a cold fire of indignation burned in her chest. When the ferry was halfway across, Mattie turned her pony and rode 100 yards down the bank. Then she spurred Little Blackie forward, right into the frigid, swirling water. The men on the ferry heard the splash. They turned, their mouths dropping open in disbelief. There, in the middle of the river, was Mattie. Her pony was swimming hard, fighting the current, but she was losing ground, being swept downstream. "Good Lord!" LaBoeuf shouted, halfway between impressed and horrified. "She's trying to swim it!" "The girl's got grit," Rooster rumbled, his one good eye wide with a new, grudging respect. He watched as she fought the current, as she spurred the pony on, her face a mask of iron determination. She was not crying for help. She was simply coming.
By the time the ferry landed on the far bank, Mattie and little Blackie were there, climbing up the muddy slope, drenched, shivering, but victorious. She had crossed the line. She was in the Indian Territory. Rooster Cogburn looked down at the sopping, shivering girl. He let out a single sharp bark of a laugh. "By God, she's done it!" LaBoeuf was less impressed. "She is a foolish, stubborn child. She could have drowned herself and the horse." "But she did not," Mattie said, her teeth chattering but her eyes blazing. "Now, where are we riding?" The journey truly began. The dynamic of the trio was set. Rooster and LaBoeuf bickered endlessly, their personalities clashing like flint and steel. LaBoeuf, the vain Texas Ranger, boasted of his marksmanship with his Sharps rifle. Rooster, the slovenly federal marshal, drank constantly from a jug of whiskey he kept in his saddlebag, his one eye scanning the horizon. They argued about the war, they argued about Texas, they argued about the right way to track a man. Mattie rode between them, a silent, sober judge. She was all business. While they bickered over their past glories, she focused on the future, on Tom Cheney. Their first lead came a day later. Rooster, through his network of informants, knew of a remote dugout cabin, a robber's roost, where outlaws sometimes holed up for the winter. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. They approached the hovel at dusk. It was a miserable-looking place, half buried in the earth, with a wisp of smoke curling from its chimney. "All right," Rooster said, dismounting. "This is where the real work begins. You two," he said to LaBoeuf and Mattie, "stay here and keep quiet." "I am not," Mattie began, but Rooster cut her off with a glare that could stop a train. "You stay. That's an order from a U.S. Marshal." He and LaBoeuf crept toward the cabin, their rifles ready. Rooster kicked the door open, and they plunged inside. Mattie, her heart pounding, slipped off her pony and crept up to the cabin's single grimy window to watch. Inside, the scene was one of pathetic desperation. Two men were there. One was a young man named Moon, his leg badly wounded. The other, a harder, older man named Quincy, was heating a knife in the fire. "Well now," Rooster grumbled, his rifle steady on the two men, "looks like we found some company." Quincy's hand hovered near his pistol. "We don't want no trouble, Marshal, just patching up my partner." Rooster's eye took in the scene. He knew these were not the men they were looking for, but they were men, and in the Territory all outlaws knew each other. "I'm looking for Ned Pepper, and a man with him named Cheney. Big man, got a black mark on his face. You know him?" Moon, his face pale with pain and fever, looked terrified, but Quincy was as cold as a snake. "Never heard him." "Your partner looks like he wants to talk." Rooster nudged Moon's wounded leg with the barrel of his rifle. Moon screamed, "Tell me where Pepper is, boy, and I'll get you a doctor. Lie to me, and I'll let Quincy here finish his work." Moon, desperate and in agony, began to talk. "We was with him. We was. Ned's got a cabin up in the Wind and Stair Mountains. He's waiting on a train job." Quincy's face turned to a mask of pure rage. "You shut your mouth, Moon." "I ain't dying for you," Moon cried. "He's at—" But he never finished the sentence. In a flash of brutal, sudden violence, Quincy grabbed a hot knife from the fire and plunged it into Moon's chest, killing him instantly. Before the body was even stopped twitching, the cabin exploded in a deafening roar of gunfire. Quincy dove for his gun, but Rooster, despite his size and his drunkenness, moved with a stunning, brutal speed. He fired twice. Quincy was thrown back against the wall, dead. It was over in 2 seconds. The cabin was suddenly terribly silent, thick with smoke and the smell of blood. Mattie, her face pressed to the grimy window, had seen it all. She had seen the cold-blooded murder. She had seen the marshal she had hired kill a man with an efficiency that was both terrifying and magnificent. She felt a wave of nausea, but she did not look away. She had paid for a man with true grit, and she had just seen, in bloody, terrible detail, exactly what that meant.
The dugout cabin was a tomb, silent save for the dripping of blood and the crackle of the dying fire. Mattie Ross stood in the doorway, her face pale but her expression resolute. She had just witnessed the brutal, efficient violence she had paid for. Rooster Cogburn, breathing heavily, reloaded his revolver, his one good eye scanning the shadows for any further threats. LaBoeuf, who had remained outside as a lookout, entered the cabin, his rifle raised. He took one look at the carnage, 2 bodies, one stabbed, one shot, and his handsome face twisted in disgust. "My God, Cogburn," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you are a barbarian. You've killed our only lead." "The boy was dead anyway," Rooster grumbled, wiping his hands on his duster. "The other one killed him. I just balanced the ledger. And the boy talked before he died. He said Pepper's place is up in the Winding Stair Mountains. That's a lead, Ranger." Mattie, ever practical, was already searching the cabin for anything useful. "What about Tom Chaney?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Did he say if Chaney was with him?" "He didn't have time, but it's Ned Pepper's gang. Chaney's with him. I can feel it." They left the cabin and rode south, the air cold and sharp with the promise of winter. The Winding Stair Mountains were a rugged, imposing wall of stone and pine, a fortress of nature that could hide an army of outlaws. The journey was arduous. They navigated steep rocky trails, their horses straining, the wind whistling through the pines. The bickering between Rooster and LaBoeuf, which had been a low simmer, now boiled over. They were 2 different species of lawmen, and the wilderness only magnified their differences. LaBoeuf, the vain ranger, prided himself on his Sharp's rifle, his long-range accuracy, and his modern methods. Rooster, the old-school Marshal, trusted his gut, his twin revolvers, and the jug of whiskey that was his constant companion. "You should let me take the lead, Cogburn," LaBoeuf would say as they surveyed a valley. "My Sharps can reach a man at half a mile. We can scout from a distance." "And what good is that?" Rooster would growl. "You shoot one, the others scatter. No, you gotta get in close. You gotta see the whites of their eyes. You gotta put the fear of God in 'em." "That's just reckless, you one-eyed drunkard. You'll get us all killed." "Better to die on your feet than live on your knees, Ranger." Mattie rode between them, a small, dark-clad figure of pure, unbending will. She was the only one who seemed to remember the purpose of their mission. "Will you both be quiet?" she'd snap, her voice cutting through their posturing. "You are frightening the game and wasting time. We are here for Tom Chaney, not to settle which of you is the bigger fool." Both men, chastened by the slip of a girl, would fall into a sullen silence, at least for a while. After 2 days of hard riding, they found it. Tucked away in a high valley near a stream was a small, well-hidden cabin. It was Ned Pepper's stronghold. From a high ridge they watched. They saw 4 men moving about the camp, tending to their horses. It was the gang. "There they are," Rooster whispered, a new, sober intensity in his voice. He pulled out his spyglass. "I see Pepper. And there, the big one by the horses. See him, Mattie?" He handed her the glass. Mattie's hands trembled, just once. She raised it to her eye, and there he was, the large, oafish man, the powder burn mark on his cheek. It was Tom Chaney. After all these months, after all this riding, her father's killer was right there in her sights. A cold, clean hatred filled her. "It's him," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper. "All right," Rooster said, taking back the glass. "Here's the plan. They're settled in. They don't know we're here. We wait till full dark. Then I go in and kick the door, and you 2 cover the back. We'll trap 'em. No muss, no fuss." But LaBoeuf would not have it. "That's insane, Cogburn. That's a suicide. There are 4 of them. You'll be cut to pieces before you take 2 steps. "It's my way, Ranger." "It's a stupid way," LaBoeuf countered. "I have a clear shot. From here, I can hit one of them, maybe 2, before they even know what's happening. We can even the odds." "And what if you miss, you vain peacock? You'll scatter them for 100 miles. "Miss! I'm a Texas Ranger, Cogburn. I don't miss." Before Rooster could stop him, LaBoeuf had settled into a sniper's position. He rested his long Sharp's rifle on a rock, took his time, and aimed. Mattie and Rooster watched, holding their breath. LaBoeuf's pride, his entire reputation, all came down to this one long shot. He fired. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley like a clap of thunder. Down at the cabin, one of the outlaws who had been holding a pot of coffee yelped as the pot exploded in his hand, a geyser of hot liquid scalding him. LaBoeuf hadn't hit the man. He'd hit the coffee pot. "You missed!" Rooster roared, a mixture of fury and grim satisfaction. "You idiot! You warned them!" Down below, the camp exploded into action. Ned Pepper, a true professional, was already shouting orders. The outlaws grabbed their rifles, kicked out their fire, and ran for their horses. They weren't going to fight. They were going to run. "They're fleeing!" Mattie cried. "Damn it all!" Rooster swore. There was no time for a plan, no time for stealth. There was only time for grit. He grabbed the reins of his horse. "Well, what are you waiting for, Ranger? Let's go!" In one fluid motion, Rooster Cogburn kicked his horse into a full gallop, charging straight down the steep rocky slope toward the cabin. He pulled the reins with his teeth, grabbed a revolver in each hand, and let out a fearsome primal yell. "Fill your hands, you sons of bitches!" he bellowed, his one eye blazing. He rode straight into the clearing, his pistols blazing, a one-man army against 4 surprised outlaws. LaBoeuf and Mattie, caught up in the madness, galloped after him. It was pure chaos. Bullets whined through the air. Ned Pepper and his gang, desperate to escape, returned fire as they mounted their horses. A bullet struck Rooster in the side, the impact nearly knocking him from his saddle, but he didn't stop. He fired, and one of the outlaws clutched his chest and fell. Another bullet grazed his horse, which screamed and reared. Rooster was thrown to the ground, landing hard. Ned Pepper, Tom Cheney, and the remaining outlaw didn't stop to finish the fight. They spurred their horses across the river and disappeared into the dense woods on the other side. They had escaped. LaBoeuf and Mattie rode up to Rooster, who was lying in the dirt, clutching his side, his face pale and twisted in pain. "You're hit," Mattie cried. "It's just a scratch," Rooster growled, but the blood seeping through his fingers told a different story. LaBoeuf looked in the direction the outlaws had fled, then back at the wounded, drunken Marshal. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "This is what your true grit gets you, Cogburn, a wounded side and empty hands. You were a reckless old fool. And you, Ranger, you couldn't hit a bull in the ass with a handful of rocks. You ruined the whole plan." "Plan? You call that a plan? That was a drunken stampede," LaBoeuf spat on the ground. "I'm done. I'm finished riding with a one-eyed, whiskey-soaked liability. The trail's gone cold, and so am I. I'm heading back to Texas. You and this brat can go on playing your games." "Fine, go!" Rooster yelled. "We don't need a dandified popinjay slowing us down." LaBoeuf didn't say another word. He turned his horse, and with a look of final, angry disgust, he rode away, leaving them. Mattie Ross stood in the silent, smoky clearing. The outlaws were gone. LaBoeuf was gone. She was alone in the middle of the Indian Territory, with a dead outlaw, a dying fire, and a wounded, drunken, one-eyed Marshal. The business of revenge had just gotten infinitely harder.
The departure of LaBoeuf cast a long, cold shadow over the valley. He was gone, and with him, it seemed, had gone the last shred of professional competence, leaving only a 14-year-old girl and a wounded, drunken Marshal. Rooster Cogburn groaned as he sat up, clutching the bloody rag to his side. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his ribs. It was painful, debilitating, but not mortal. Not yet. "Well, little sister," he grumbled, his voice tight with pain, "it seems it's just you and me." Mattie looked at the blood seeping through his fingers, then at the empty wilderness around them. The outlaws were gone, the trail was cold, and her only ally was a one-eyed old man who was now bleeding in the dirt. A lesser person would have despaired, but Mattie Ross was not a lesser person. She was her father's daughter. "We must tend to that wound, Marshal," she said, her voice all business. She tore a strip of cloth from her own petticoat, her motions quick and practical. "And then we must find a high-country doctor." "There ain't no doctors out here," Rooster spat, wincing as she pressed the cloth against the wound. "And we ain't stopping, not now." "You are in no condition to ride," Mattie stated. "And you are in no condition to argue," he shot back. "Pepper's running. He's running fast, but he's got to stop sometime. We keep moving." For 3 days they pushed on, a grim and mismatched pair. Rooster, fueled by whiskey and a stubbornness that matched Mattie's own, stayed in the saddle, though his face was pale and slick with a feverish sweat. Mattie rode beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, her father's heavy revolver now tucked into her belt. She had become the lookout, the nurse, and the driving will of their failing expedition. The bickering between them softened, replaced by a quiet shared misery. In their isolation, a grudging respect began to grow. He saw in her an iron will he'd never encountered in any man, let alone a child. She saw in him, beneath the drink and the bluster, the last ember of that true grit she had paid for. "You're a strange child, Mattie," he grumbled one night as they huddled by a small, smokeless fire. "Most girls your age are playing with dolls. You're out here hunting killers. I have no time for dolls, and this is not a game. I will see Tom Chaney hang." "He might kill you first," Rooster said, his voice not unkind. "He's a half-wit, but a dangerous one. And Ned Pepper, Ned's smart. He's as smart as he is mean." "That is why I hired you," Mattie said simply. Rooster looked at her, his one good eye catching the firelight. "Well," he said, taking a long pull from his jug, "you're getting your money's worth, I reckon." On the 4th day, their horses were exhausted and their water was gone. They were in a high rocky basin, the air thin and cold. Rooster was weak, his fever worsening. "Water. We gotta find water." Mattie looked around. Below them was a steep embankment, and at the bottom she could hear the faint sound of a running stream. "You stay here," she said, dismounting from her pony. "I will go. I will bring back water." "Don't be a fool," Rooster growled. "This is snake country. You wait, I'll—" He tried to stand, but a wave of dizziness and pain forced him back down. "You will stay," Mattie commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. She took the water skins and her father's pistol and began the long, careful climb down the rocky slope. She reached the bottom, the air cool and damp by the stream. She knelt by the water, the sound of the stream a blessed relief. She filled the first water skin and was about to fill the second when she heard a noise from just around the bend. It was the sound of a man talking to his horse. Her blood turned to ice. She drew her father's heavy revolver, her small hand struggling with the weight of it. She crept forward, using the boulders as cover, and peered around the bend. There he was, not 20 yards away. It was Tom Chaney. He was alone, watering his horse in the stream, his rifle still in his saddle scabbard. He hadn't seen her. He was humming, a tuneless, idiotic sound. It was the man who had murdered her father, the man she had tracked for hundreds of miles, the man she had sacrificed everything to find, and he was right there. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the grief of the past months crystallized into a single cold point of pure righteous fury. This was her moment. This was the justice she had paid for. "Tom Chaney," she called out, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet basin. Chaney spun around, his dull eyes wide with surprise. He saw her, a small, dark-clad girl, leveling a massive pistol at his chest. "I know you," he said, his voice a slow, confused drawl. "You're the Ross girl." "I am Mattie Ross, daughter of Frank Ross, the man you murdered in Fort Smith." "I didn't mean to, little sister. He come at me. It was an accident." "It was no accident," Mattie said, her knuckles white on the grip of the gun. "You shot him down and left him to die. I am here to see you hang." "Now hold on," he said, taking a small step to his left, inching towards his horse's rifle. "We can talk this. I have nothing to say to you. You must pay for your crime." She cocked the heavy hammer of the revolver. The sound was a loud, definitive click in the silence. Cheney froze. He saw the look in her eyes. This wasn't a threat. This was a sentence. "You won't shoot," he sneered, but his voice was trembling. "You're just a girl." "I am not," Mattie said, and she pulled the trigger. The big pistol, her father's gun, leapt in her hand, the recoil a brutal physical shock. The bullet struck Cheney in the side, spinning him around. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of pain and surprise, and clutched his ribs. He was hit, but he wasn't down. Mattie tried to fire again, but the recoil had been too much, the gun too heavy. She fumbled, trying to recock the hammer. Cheney, snarling like a wounded animal, lunged at her. He was on her before she could raise the pistol, his large, brutish hands grabbing her, knocking the gun from her grasp. He hit her, a hard, open-handed blow that sent her sprawling onto the rocks. "You shot me, Cheney!" he roared, his dull eyes now lit with a murderous rage. "You little whelp, I'll kill you!" He dragged her to her feet, his hand in her hair, and put his knife to her throat. But just as he was about to silence her, a voice echoed from across the basin. "Hold it right there, Cheney!" It was Lucky Ned Pepper. He and his gang had been camped just upstream. They rode up, their rifles leveled. Cheney froze, his grip on Mattie tightening. "Well now," Ned Pepper said, his voice calm and appraising. He looked at the wounded Cheney and then at the small, furious girl. "What in the hell have we here?" "She shot me, Ned," the little bitch whined. "She shot me." Ned Pepper looked at Mattie, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene. "This the Ross girl, Cheney? The one whose father you killed?" "She is." Ned Pepper let out a low whistle. He looked at Mattie with a kind of professional curiosity. "You've come a long way to find this fool, girl, a mighty long way." He dismounted and took Mattie from Cheney. "You're my prisoner now," he said to her, his voice not unkind. "And you," he said to Cheney, "are a liability." Up on the ridge, Rooster Cogburn, weak and feverish, had heard the shotgun. He grabbed his rifle and began the slow, agonizing crawl to the edge of the cliff. He looked down and saw it all. Mattie, a captive in Ned Pepper's camp, and Tom Cheney, wounded but alive. His mission and Mattie's had just failed in the most catastrophic way possible.
Mattie Ross, small and defiant, found herself a prisoner in Lucky Ned Pepper's camp. Tom Cheney, his side bleeding from Mattie's shot, snarled at her, still furious. Ned Pepper, however, looked at her with a strange, calculating respect. He saw not a child, but a force of nature. "You got grit, girl," Ned said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "More than most men I know." From the ridge above, Rooster Cogburn, weak and feverish, watched the scene unfold. His eyes, though blurry from pain, narrowed. Mattie was a captive. Cheney was there, and Ned Pepper had her. He was too injured to charge in alone, and LaBoeuf, their only other ally, was long gone. He was out of options. Just then, a figure appeared on the ridge beside Rooster. It was LaBoeuf. He had not gone back to Texas after all. He had lingered, his conscience, or perhaps his pride, refusing to let him abandon them entirely. He saw Mattie with the outlaws. "They've got her," LaBoeuf whispered, his face pale with shock. "They do, and I ain't in no shape to do much about it." LaBoeuf looked at the wounded Marshal, then down at the camp. "I'll go," he said, a new grim determination in his voice. "I'll try to get her out." Below, Ned Pepper was talking to Mattie. "You want Cheney, girl? All right, we'll make a trade. You give us the Marshal, and you get your killer." Mattie's eyes widened. They knew Rooster was up there, and they wanted him. She looked at Cheney, then at Ned. "I will not betray Marshal Cogburn," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Ned Pepper laughed. "You're a loyal one. Too bad. Cheney, take her away. Tie her up. We'll decide what to do with her later." As Cheney roughly dragged Mattie towards a tree, LaBoeuf made his move. He crept down the slope, his Sharps rifle ready. He had no plan, only a desperate hope. He found a vantage point behind a rock and fired. The shot caught Tom Cheney in the arm, spinning him around again. "Cheney's hit!" Ned Pepper yelled. "They're up there, behind the rocks!" Chaos erupted in the camp. The outlaws scrambled for cover. Ned Pepper, a veteran of countless ambushes, instantly returned fire, his bullets kicking up dust around LaBoeuf's position. Rooster Cogburn, seeing LaBoeuf engaged, found a desperate surge of adrenaline. He bit down on his duster and began to slide down the steep slope, his rifle in his hand. The gunfight was sharp and brutal. LaBoeuf, a superb marksman, held his own, pinning down two of Ned Pepper's men. Rooster, despite his wound, moved with a surprising speed, firing his rifle, laying down covering fire. In the confusion, Tom Cheney, wounded and desperate, saw an opportunity. He grabbed Mattie, pulled her behind a tree, and put his pistol to her head. "I'll kill her, Ned. I swear I will." "No, Cheney, you idiot!" Ned Pepper shouted. "She's our hostage!" But Cheney, driven by pain and stupidity, was beyond reason. He dragged Mattie deeper into the thicket, away from the main gunfight. Mattie struggled, but his grip was like iron. He was going to kill her. Just as Cheney was about to pull the trigger, LaBoeuf saw them. He saw the gleam of Cheney's pistol against Mattie's head. He fired his Sharps rifle, the long-range shot, a desperate gamble. The bullet struck Cheney, not in the head, but in the chest, knocking him backwards. Cheney screamed, dropping Mattie, and stumbled away, clutching his wound. But Cheney was not dead. He turned, his pistol still in his hand, and staggered towards Mattie, his dull eyes blazing with a final murderous intent. Mattie, stunned but alive, fumbled for her father's pistol, which she had picked up in the chaos. As Cheney raised his gun to finish her, LaBoeuf appeared. He had run from his cover, leaving himself exposed. He tackled Cheney, pulling him away from Mattie. The two men wrestled, Cheney, still powerful despite his wounds, overpowering the ranger. Cheney raised his knife, ready to plunge it into LaBoeuf's back. Suddenly, a shot rang out. It was Rooster Cogburn. He had crawled through the thicket, his wound throbbing, and fired his rifle. The bullet struck Cheney in the head, killing him instantly. Tom Cheney, the man who had murdered Frank Ross, finally fell, dead at last. Rooster lowered his rifle, breathing heavily. "Well," he said, his voice weak, "that's one less to worry about." But the fight wasn't over. Ned Pepper, seeing his men falling and Cheney dead, knew he had to retreat. He and his remaining outlaws mounted their horses, firing a last volley of shots, and galloped away, disappearing into the woods. Rooster and LaBoeuf had won, but their victory was bittersweet. LaBoeuf lay on the ground, wounded. "He got me, Cogburn," he gasped, clutching his stomach. "It's bad." Rooster knelt beside him, his face grim. "Hang on, Ranger." Mattie, relieved but still shaken, looked around for her horse, Little Blackie. She spotted him grazing peacefully nearby. She walked towards him, but as she stepped, she felt a sharp, agonizing pain. She looked down. She had stepped into a snake pit, a nest of venomous rattlesnakes. One of them had bitten her in the hand. "Rooster!" she screamed, her voice filled with sudden, agonizing terror. Rooster, seeing her fall, his heart sinking, grabbed her. The bite was severe, the venom already spreading. He knew what he had to do. He pulled out his knife, cut her hand, and began to suck the poison out, spitting it furiously onto the ground. "LaBoeuf!" he yelled, still sucking. "Help me get her to a doctor. She's been bit bad." LaBoeuf, despite his own mortal wound, struggled to his feet. Together, the two men, one bleeding internally, the other fighting a poisonous snakebite, found their horses.
They put Mattie onto little Blackie, holding her upright, and began the frantic, desperate ride back towards Fort Smith, away from the dangers of the Indian Territory. LaBoeuf held on for a few miles, but his wound was too severe. He finally slumped forward and died in his saddle. Rooster, heartbroken but grimly determined, took Mattie's reins. He was alone again, with a dying girl, in a race against time. He pushed little Blackie relentlessly, riding through the night, through treacherous terrain, holding the fading girl to him. He was a one-eyed, drunken old Marshal, but in that moment, he became a legend. He drove the small pony beyond its limits, urging it on, fighting for Mattie's life with every ounce of true grit he possessed. He finally reached Fort Smith, Mattie barely conscious. He burst into a doctor's office, carrying her in his arms, his face streaked with dirt and blood and tears. He had saved her. She would live. Years passed. Mattie Ross recovered, but she never saw Rooster Cogburn again. She visited him once, after his final retirement, at a Wild West show, where he was performing as a trick rider. He had tried to jump a fence, but his horse faltered, and he disappeared behind it. She waited. He never reappeared. He simply rode off, a man too wild for civilization, too independent for a comfortable life. Mattie grew into a formidable woman, a lawyer, much like her father. She lived a long and prosperous life, but she never forgot the one-eyed Marshal who had finally found his true grit in the pursuit of justice and who had saved her life at the cost of his last shred of peace. She often thought of him out there, somewhere, still wandering, still wild.